I've always enjoyed the Watch Dogs franchise. The first game was an interesting proof of concept that you could give a player a wide range of tools to solve their goals with, and that some players would use them rather than the tried and true method of kicks in door and shoots everyone. Watch Dogs 2, in turn, dialed that idea up, giving the player an even wider range of abilities and mechanics to play with, while also pairing them with a protagonist who was actually enjoyable to play as, in a setting that genuinely felt analogous to our real world. Then came Watch Dogs Legion. I'll admit, when it first came out, I, like everyone, was a little disappointed at how shallow it had become. A lot of our tools from Watch Dogs 2 had been neutered or removed completely. The recruit anyone mechanic, the game's main selling point, was interesting, but admittedly led to most characters being completely throwaway after a certain point, and the arbitrary rules about who could and couldn't use real guns was frustrating to say the least. But I still enjoyed it. But Watch Dogs Legion did introduce something new to the game series, an online semi-live service game mode where the player could run around and fight against the injustices of the fictional Albion Corporation and Clan Kelly for as long as they liked, with repeatable missions, strikes, and even a sort of raid-style game mode called Tactical Ops. The service is still online today, in fact, having just launched Season 20, the Season of the Nobles. Recently, I got the random urge to play Legion again and check out if anyone was still playing the online mode, and as I played it, my mind does what it likes to do. It analyzed and critiqued what I was experiencing and looked for ways to improve that experience. So for this video, I'm not going to be discussing the plot of Watch Dogs Legion's main game. Instead, I want to talk about its online mode and how I think, with a bit of tweaking, Watch Dogs Legion Online could be turned into a hugely successful online service game. Just like with all my videos, please keep in mind I am by no means an expert on any of the subjects I discuss in this video, and if you have opinions that differ from mine, that is okay. Now, I'm sure some of you are about to comment how Legions already has a live service mode. I literally called it that twice in my opening statement. To which I would respond, it's only semi-live service mode. Allow me to explain. Today, the best example of a successful live service game that I can point to is probably, unsurprisingly, Destiny 2. Now yes, we can argue back and forth on if that is a good live service game, but notice how I didn't say good previously. I said successful. Unfortunately, good is a subjective term, with each person you ask having their own ideas of what will or would make something good. Success, on the other hand, is much more easily and categorically defined, and any game that is sold between 16 and 18 million copies sees an active daily player count of around 44,000 concurrent players and has generated over $2 billion in gross revenue since 2007 through game sales, expansions, season passes, and microtransactions, can definitely be classified as a success. So for a quick comparison, let's take a look at what Destiny 2 has and what Watch Dogs Legion Online has, and see how they compare as the games stand right now. Destiny 2 has an overarching narrative that strings together not only the events of the main game, but subsequent expansions and player seasons. It has clearly defined classes that play and experience the game and its different levels differently. The game's various classes have clearly defined abilities and powers, some of which are shared but are mostly unique to the player's selected class. It has different styled missions, including daily missions, weekly missions, minor regional missions, local patrols, strikes, raids, and replayable story missions. It has an array of various weapons with unique stats and perks to select from and play with. It has alternative game modes, including Gambit, Crucible, Iron Banner, Dares of Eternity, and Echoes of the Ancient. It has various armors that change the appearance of your character through transmog or through just natural appearance. Said armors also provide buffs to the player characters and grant them bonuses to one of any 5 stats. Several semi-open world zones in which to play in, as well as smaller restricted world zones, and multiple enemy types. Watch Dogs Legion, on the other hand, has a tangential connection to the main plot of the game that is never fully fleshed out, has a recruit any NPC style mechanic, no customizable NPC-specific perks or abilities. It has an array of differently styled mission types, including replayable single-player missions, co-op missions, PvP missions, PvE missions, as well as daily and weekly challenges. A small selection of weapons that can be shared amongst the player, as well as NPC-specific weapons. customizable outfits, clothing, and masks for playable characters, several different types of enemies, a large open-world area to play in, as well as smaller restricted zones, and upgradable tech and abilities. As you can no doubt tell, Watch Dogs Legion does not bring as much to the table as Destiny 2. But I don't think that we should try to make it more like Destiny 2 either. Instead, I want to turn your attention to the game's existing mechanics and show how, with a few simple tweaks and adjustments, those mechanics could be used to fine-tune the gameplay into something better than it already is. One advantage that Destiny does have over Legion's Online is its ongoing story, with each season bringing a new piece of the game's narrative that helps to move the story forward. Simply put, Watch Dogs Legion does not have this at all, meaning each season and its themes basically boil down to a descriptor of the kinds of customizations you can unlock for that season and nothing more. There is no actual story to Legion's Online beyond what the player did during that gaming session. Individual missions may have a small story attached to them, but that story ends the moment the mission is complete and does not affect the player in any meaningful way. But what if we changed that? What if instead we made it so the online mode takes place, say, 6 months after the events of the main game? With Albion's CEO dead or in jail, Zero Day defeated, and Clan Kelly now without their leader, perhaps DedSec agrees that they would go silent for a time and allow the fruits of their labor to grow and spread, so to speak. They thought things would return to normal, that Albion would slowly crumble from within and power would be returned to the people, that Clan Kelly would go back to being a small-time gang rather than a major criminal syndicate. But that didn't happen. Instead, the board of directors at Albion elected a new CEO, Elton Tusk, who then embarked on a series of political and public appearances and appealed to Parliament to address the actions of his predecessor, Nigel Cass. He admitted that Nigel went too far, that driven out of a compulsive need to fulfill his mission to keep London safe, he took things to a level that was unacceptable, that his methods were wrong, and that he, Elton Tusk, is sorry for the damage that was done and the lives that were lost. That certain measures like inter-district checkpoints and random ID checks will no longer be employed by Albion. Behind closed doors, while addressing the House of Commons and British Parliament, Tusk spins the narrative that Albion can still be a force for good in the city, that it can still be trusted to follow its mandate of keeping the city safe, perhaps while also implying that if they were removed from their position as London's defenders, crime would go back up. So in a surprise vote, Albion is allowed to maintain its position as a paramilitary police force within the city. At the same time, several minor lieutenants of Clan Kelly suddenly begin to start making a series of powerful moves and plays against each other, each of them vying for control of Clan Kelly's former districts and operations. And unlike before, they've somehow managed to get their hands on some serious weapons and tech, some of which is rumored to be old Albion tech that was supposed to be destroyed or decommissioned. Just by adding these few story details, there's now suddenly a hook to the online mode, a reason to keep playing the game even after you beat the main campaign. You thought you'd won? Don't make me laugh. You could even explain away not having the same characters you had in the single-player mode, as when Bagley went to contact the agents of DedSec, he found that they had all vanished, meaning he, and by extension the player, has to start again from scratch and build a new team. These simple narratives give the online mode a hook, and gives the player a goal, and allows for further exploration and story developments, as well as new ideas. It allows for the introduction of further storytelling, with the various player seasons of the game. Perhaps in one season, players get wind of an incriminating file that Albion has in their possession that proves they're still up to some of their old tricks, even after swearing they'd stop. Perhaps in another season, one of Clan Kelly's factions starts making major pushes into certain sections of the city. In another season, a rival-for-hire hacker collective springs up and starts to work against DedSec, selling their skills to the highest bidder, and it's up to the players in Legion's Online to put a stop to it. These additional narratives would keep the online mode feeling fresh, and would give the players a reason to keep coming back. Why? Because the mission isn't over. Because Albion and Clan Kelly are still causing problems, and DedSec, by extension the player, is the only group in a position to do anything about it. The narratives could even tug on a player's real-world sympathies and perceptions, as many corporations have been caught doing all kinds of shady things, only to fire their CEO, hire a new one, and go right back to doing things business as usual in real life. With a new narrative in place for the online mode, so too comes the option for new missions. Perhaps Legion Online could borrow a page from No Man's Sky, and have some missions be unlocked through community participation. For example, you could keep the always available quick missions that are on the map at all times, but narratively tweak them to tie into whatever the overarching story of the season is. Now you're no longer just stealing incriminating evidence or freeing political prisoners. Now you're doing those things in service to a set of higher goals. That is to say, a series of missions that unlock after certain community milestones are reached. Each mission that is unlocked then becomes replayable for the season and ties into the seasonal narrative as well. For example, perhaps in one season DedSec learns that a mysterious buyer has suddenly started siphoning and buying up large chunks of the crypto market. Completing X number of smaller patrol-style missions allows DedSec to pinpoint a series of locations around the city that turn out to be crypto mining facilities or crypto wallet repositories or servers that house illegal crypto exchanges. And once you have enough info on these facilities, you can select to run a more strike-oriented styled mission, if you'll excuse me borrowing the term from Destiny. That is to say, a mission that is conducted away from the open world in a restricted zone, that would see the player having to select a single member of their team to play as, and then have them, ideally, work together with other players to infiltrate the facility, neutralize internal security, and then destroy, hack, or steal a specific objective before having to exfiltrate and then reach a rendezvous point to exit and complete the mission. There could even be a twist. In addition to some standard mission rewards, the player is rewarded with a bit of narrative as well. Perhaps it turns out this isn't the only facility like this, but in order to learn more about these additional facilities, players will need to go back to running patrol-style missions for a time to contribute to the community's completion percentile, which, as it goes up, will unlock these additional missions. By introducing a mission-style structure like this, the player is no longer acting as an independent agent, but instead as a single node of a larger collective. Kinda like how DedSec is written to sound like they actually operate. Each small victory adds up, with players now having an incentive beyond just experience for completing those missions. You could even reward the community further. If they manage to complete all tiers of the community participation, then perhaps it could unlock some high-stakes raid-style mission. One that would see the narrative of the season concluded while also testing the player's skills. Using the above scenario of the mysterious crypto buyer, perhaps DedSec learns that all the stolen crypto is about to be transported out of London, so DedSec arranges for a series of heists to be performed to steal the servers that house the crypto wallets. By tying the missions in with the narrative, it gives them a narrative weight and meaning that they lacked before. You're no longer running missions because there's nothing else to do in Legions Online. You're doing it because by completing them, you're contributing to a larger network of people working towards a single goal, which in turn unlocks rewards and additional goals as you continue. With this setup, you could even still keep in some of the more lighthearted and funny-styled missions, like Spider-Bot Racing, the Spider-Bot Arena, as well as the player versus player battleground modes, and instead, cast them in the light of this is what DedSec agents do in their spare time for fun, or when they're laying low from Albion or Clan Kelly. And all of the above changes would dovetail with the changes that I would make to the NPCs of the world. The game's mandate of play as anyone means all missions must be solvable by anyone, which hurt the complexity of the game and the situations the player could find themselves in. To fix this, I have a couple different solutions. Firstly, I'd sort every NPC that the game can generate into one of maybe 10 categories, such as police, Albion soldiers, Clan Kelly criminals, transients, criminals, tech workers, bare-knuckle fighters, and a few others. Then, each of those categories would have their own pool of perks and debuffs that the system can pull from when it randomly generates that character, with some abilities only being accessible through certain types of NPCs. For example, transient characters would be the only characters able to generate passive income with their ability to beg for money. Or tech workers would be the only ones who can have the unlimited key-stealing range perk. By doing this, the characters with these abilities now serve an actual purpose in your team. Another issue people complained about is that once you found a really good character out in the wild, usually a hitman or a spy, There was basically no need to change to any other character. Now I have a few ideas to fix this, with 2 ideas floating to the top. Firstly, I'd institute some kind of semi-constant wanted state on player characters that go from mission to mission within the open world. And while that may sound like a lousy idea, let me explain myself first. In previous games, CTOS is the system that Albion uses and is able to track criminals and those that cause trouble. And while DedSec has the ability to scrub their agents from Albion's watch list, I highly doubt that these scrubs are done in real time. Otherwise, we'd lose our wanted status the moment we left the area that we had been spotted committing a crime in. I therefore think that if a player is actively disrupting Albion or Clan Kelly's operations and committing crimes out in the open world, then the city's CTOS is watching and compiling information on them. This semi-permanent wanted system would have ranks 1 through 5, and if your character triggers a wanted status while in the middle of a mission, then the police response starts at that wanted level. So let's say your character has a wanted level of 3 and is caught trying to break into an Albion facility. Then the police response would automatically start at level 3 and go up from there. So how would you lower your wanted level? Simple, don't play as that character for a while. Narratively, having that player lay low allows DedSec to operate in the background, slowly erasing surveillance footage, corrupting police reports, or bribing officials, which in turn causes your wanted level to slowly decrease over time. Perhaps you could even have special missions around characters who have a max wanted level, where the player must swap to a different character and undertake a special mission to erase the crimes against their fellow agent. You could even have wanted levels for Clan Kelly and Albion be separate. That way a character that is only slightly wanted by Albion could still be used in a Clan Kelly-based mission without fear of additional retaliation, so long as the player avoids Albion patrols on their way to the mission site, or vice versa. By limiting the amount of time a player can play as a specific character, the player must now become strategic with who they are playing as. They can still rush in guns blazing as a hitman if they want, but that will cause the wanted level to increase a lot faster than if they had tried to sneak in quietly or chosen a character better suited for the mission. Additionally, I would not make managing to stealth an entire mission a freebie and not incur any kind of a wanted penalty, but perhaps you could run 2 or 3 stealth missions before your wanted level starts to increase, to signify that while you are being sneaky, CTOS is able to look at your tactics and methods and start to put together a profile, kind of like how law enforcement can do the same thing in real life. Additionally, another technique I would use to force players to switch would be introducing the idea that certain types of characters can only do certain types of strike missions. Let's use my previous mentioned strike idea of a crypto heist as an example. DedSec has discovered that a crypto farm is being housed inside a warehouse that is being run by Clan Kelly and is used for bare-knuckle fighting. So what kind of NPCs would you naturally find in this kind of an environment? Well, you'd definitely find Clan Kelly members, perhaps a few IT specialists to keep the crypto farm running. You'll have bare-knuckle fighters who compete in the arena, people watching the fights, and maybe a few homeless people and other various criminal types scattered about. Congratulations, you just identified which types of characters the player could play as and pick from if they wanted to play this mission. And if the player doesn't have these types of characters in their roster, then there's an easy workaround. They have to go out into the open world, find one, and recruit them. See, unlike pretty much every AAA studio these days, I'm not afraid to wall off content from players who don't meet certain criteria. I grew up in the Morrowind era of gaming, where if you wanted to be in the Mages Guild, you actually had to have a high skill in magic. By requiring players to have specific types of characters for specific strike missions, it encourages the players not only to constantly be on the lookout for better versions of that character category, but it forces players to no longer rely on the hitman or the spy or their strongest members, and thus forces them to play characters they might otherwise ignore. But then you might be asking, where and when can I use my uber powerful characters, your hitmans, your spies, your black hat hackers, etc.? And my response to that would be in the raid missions. Naturally, when DedSec sends agents off to complete the hardest missions, they would only send their most capable agents, not some low-level script kiddie. Plus, you can still use them in the open world to run patrol missions and go on mindless rampages if that's your jam. But these heavy hitters are now used more sparingly, meaning the player can't just steamroll through the missions with them. That way, when the player does get to use them in the moment, they're more appropriately epic and awesome. One other minor tweak I would make is the method of recruitment. I know in the base game some people complained that the procedurally generated missions players had to go through to recruit people was boring and not overly complicated, and in some ways I agree, but I did enjoy it a lot more than just buying recruits with tech points like you do in the online mode. So I'd bring back the procedurally generated recruitment missions and just work to try and make them a little more diverse. I might even make it so that after a certain amount of time, your teammates will come to you with additional missions they need your help with, and failing to complete those missions in a certain amount of time would result in those recruits either leaving DedSec temporarily or possibly even permanently. By implementing these ideas, one of Watch Dogs' most glaring issues becomes alleviated. Now each member of your team brings something unique to the group. The play as anyone concept of the game now not only incentivizes you to keep your eyes peeled for better characters, but forces you to then use them, rather than recruiting characters and then leaving them to rot in your roster while you only use your strongest and most powerful characters to steamroll through the game. Gameplay-wise, there isn't a ton I would change, though I do have one or two little nitpicks and tweaks. As I mentioned in the players section, I don't like how the online mode tech points are used to buy recruits, as I feel it kind of cheapens the act of recruiting in the first place. So I do away with that and go back to the procedural missions. But I do think that tech points could be used to improve your characters, and not just by upgrading their gear, but also possibly by allowing you to re-roll a character's perks, or quite possibly, with a large enough investment of tech points, teach them to use actual lethal weapons and specialist melee weapons. Though I would limit them based off their character category, as I don't think it makes a lot of sense for a homeless person to own and operate a military-grade grenade launcher. And yes, I know you can run into people like that in the game, but that doesn't mean I think it's a good idea. Another thing I would tweak is the game's in-game economy. I'm not sure about everyone else, but I often found myself struggling to make money in Legion. Now yes, I know there are side gigs in the game that the player can do, but if I'm honest, I didn't really enjoy any of them enough to really spend a lot of time doing them. I like the bare-knuckle fighting the most, but with how limited the options are to do it, it's not a cure-all for your currency issues. Though it can be lucrative if you find a character who gets money when they knock someone out. To fix this, one option I might explore is for the player to have some kind of passive income. Perhaps if they have a character in their team who is a crypto investor or something along those lines, maybe every so often a small dividend is given to the player, anywhere from 50 to 200 dosh as the game calls it. Either that, or I'd make hackable ATMs more prevalent in the game, making them appear more often so the player can hack them for 30 dosh each. Or else I might tweak panhandlers so that when you're not playing as them, they're actively contributing a little bit of their earnings to DedSec. Though to balance it, I might make it so that way if you want their continued help, you have to do additional missions for them at a more frequent pace. For that matter, I might also add a similar mission mechanic for if the player recruits Clan Kelly or Albion members to work for them, as additional effort would be needed to keep their double agent status a secret, resulting in additional missions needed to keep them on your team. When it comes to clothing, I don't mind most of the looks, but I am a little bummed that we don't have more control over the color of our clothing, as some clothing simply doesn't appear in certain colors. So I'd maybe try to implement a wider variety of colors that the players can select when choosing what they want to wear. The last change I would make is pretty minor, but I would tweak the driving controls slightly. It was very disconcerting to me when I pressed what I thought was going to be the brake button, only to engage the auto drive feature in the car I was in. As a result, I would tweak it so that maybe you have to hold down the button for a few seconds, or else press it and another button to activate that auto drive function. Combat-wise, there isn't a lot that I think needs to be changed or adjusted. I, like many people, dislike the new non-lethal weapons, but I don't think they're necessarily a bad idea, as I think some characters and NPCs absolutely would object to killing other people. It's just that they lack any kind of decent feedback or recoil, which makes them feel floaty and weak when I'm using them. So I would definitely spend some time tweaking their mechanics. I might also add some kind of a system where if you manage to land a certain number of shots with them on a target, that target will burst and arc electricity to other nearby targets. Just a little extra something to set the non-lethal weapons apart from their deadlier counterparts. As I mentioned previously, I would also slightly adjust how lethal weapons work with NPCs that you recruit, possibly by requiring a large investment of maybe 100 or so tech points. The player would then be able to train any agent of their choosing in the use of any one lethal weapon, not including specialty melee weapons like the combat baton or crowbar. Beyond those adjustments though, I don't think combat needs many tweaks. I think it has good flow, and I feel the amount of damage a player can take is fairly reasonable. I also don't mind the injury timer when an agent gets downed, so I would keep in that as well. As it stands right now, Watch Dogs Legion Online is a decent enough foundation to work with. Sure, some things would need to be updated and changed, but overall the core of the gameplay is solid, and would provide plenty of ways in which it could be improved and iterated upon. Like with all online service games, however, the question is not just about how to make a fun game, but also how to support that game in the months and years after its release. And it's that second part of the question that seems to stump many studios, who don't seem to have an understanding or willpower to support a game beyond a year or two, even if that game is well received by audiences. And sadly, Watch Dogs Legion did not have the best start when it was released. That being said, the game still has its fans, a fact I was reminded of when I booted it up to gather the footage you've been watching. I never had issues finding people to play with, although I will confess a lot of people lacked microphones needed for the truly high-level missions the online mode does currently provide. At the end of the day, I truly do think Watch Dogs Legion Online has the potential to become a majorly popular live service game. In this day and age, when public trust in big tech is at an all-time low, it seems to me that the Watch Dogs franchise should be thriving in a kind of renaissance. True, it would take some reworking of the game's existing mechanics, and a long-term ongoing story would be needed to maintain a player's interest. But taking down a corporation like Albion or a crime syndicate like Clan Kelly isn't something you can do in just a weekend. So almost any plot they come up with could be supported in the long term, so long as it somehow relates to the main goal of bringing down those with corrupt power. Sadly, the developers and publishers seem to have basically abandoned the series, with the only recent news about it being a very strange choose-your-own-adventure follow-up to Legion that is available on Audible for some reason. I want to thank those of you who watched this video. I know it was different than my usual ones, and I'm not sure if I'll be making more like this or if this shall remain a one-off strange kind of video. Either way, I want to thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed my video, feel free to check out some of my other ones as well.